there, everybody, and welcome to the first ever studio sessions here at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. We are really pleased to be bringing you this live conversation here in our resident artist Abi Ogle studio space. So this is something that we've come up with to help keep people connected to our resident artists, and we're really lucky that Abi has generously agreed to be our guinea pig for our first ever run. Thank you, Abi.
You got it.
So what we are going to be trying to do is we're going to keep these going. There should be some more interviews coming. We'll be having one with Brian Vu, our other resident artist here currently, and with Nicole Lemaire. Both are coming up in the end of August and September, respectively. So please stay tuned to our pages and our social media outlets to find out when those events are coming up. But for now, I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I really want everybody who is excited about Abi's work to feel free to sound off in the chat, comment, and ask us any questions that you might have about our work, because we will be entertaining audience questions at the end of this interview. Thank you, Blaze Middleton, for being our excellent moderator and our stream runner. We really appreciate your help. And thank you to Ned Gale, who designed our very cool and groovy intro for our studio session segments. So, Abi, super stoked to be here. Abi is a multimedia artist who has a focus in fibers, but as you can see from just looking around her studio space, she is an avid experimenter in all sorts of materials and has a lot of processes and wonderful things to share with us, so really excited to be here. Thank you, Abi.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's exciting to venture into the unknown with you.
Right? Yay! So today we're going to kick off this studio session with a very special demo that Abi has agreed to do for us. That'll be a two-parter. So Abi, do you want to go ahead and tell us about what you're going to show us?
Sure. So we are going to make a mold of my tongue using dental alginate. So I'm going to mix this as we talk, and then we're going to have 30 glorious seconds of me sticking my tongue into this goop, and then we'll make a mold using wax, soy wax, afterwards. So one thing you should know is it's not safe to just use any kind of material to make a mold of your tongue, particularly in your mouth. So please don't just make casts of things at home. This is dental alginate, so it very specifically is for casting in your mouth. So we're going to mix this up a little bit better.
I don't know if this brings up any memories for anyone else, but it really takes me back to when I had some braces and molds done, so it's really a very visceral thing.
Yeah, it's minty fresh. That's
Ooh.
The flavor, so very exciting. Okay, so almost there.
Abi's been doing a series of a lot of different casts with this wax material, or this alginate, which we would really love to share with y'all. Maybe sometime later on in this interview we'll have a chance to pull them out and give you a better look. But for now we're about to get the front row view of how the magic really happens. So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's really kind of bizarre to have a cast of the inside of your mouth, or a cast of anything. It's really satisfying, though, to get to work with.
Honestly, when I was a kid, there weren't any flavors. It just tasted like alginate.
No,
It was pretty
gross.
rough.
Okay, we're going to try this. Let's see. All right. Ready for this?
Now that's dedication, folks.
Mm-hmm.
So Abi's going to hold this in her mouth for another few seconds. 30 seconds, I think, is the amount of time she usually leaves the alginate to set over her tongue in this case.
All right. Now the alginate, cool enough, turns from pink to white, which is the proof that it's done. So oops, let me put my mask back on. So the material has turned from this lovely pink color into this white, so that just shows that it's hardened up. And then what we'll do now is we'll pour some wax into this mold, and then we'll have a sculpture of my tongue. So thanks for bearing with us for those bizarre 30 seconds.
So what we're going to do is while the wax is setting, we're going to continue our interview, and then at the end we're going to have a very exciting reveal where the wax is pulled and we have a tongue impression. So really super cool and exciting.
Oh yeah.
Do you need a minute to wipe your hands or anything?
I think I'm okay.
Cool.
I mean, it's just,
Oh, so you stick a little bit of monofilament into the wax so that you can easily grab it and pull it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
same idea as a popsicle.
Right
so
on.
You just make a popsicle of your tongue, essentially.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really excited to see how that comes out. And actually, it's a really good segue because dental alginate is not something I would usually imagine in the creating of work that, is kind of in line with what you're doing generally. So it's a great segue into your materials and the way that you explore materials. So, for instance, while you've been here at the Craft Center, you've explored deeply Texas natives like Texas Ruby Red Grapefruit, which was used to make a piece that will be featured in our upcoming exhibition in residence in the Ashford Gallery. But as well, you've done things like experiment with wood oats, which I know you had installed in the hallway a few months ago before things changed. But that was very much engaged with local flora and fauna and just the explorations of that. So can you tell us a little bit about how you engage with materials where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am someone who really believes that materials matter. And in that vein of thinking, I think that means, for me, as someone who's also really interested in place, that if you take the time to explore the things around you, they can become these really unexpectedly delightful things. So a lot of my practice with particularly natural materials involves seeing something that I've seen maybe 100 times and seeing if there's a way that I can really uniquely and unexpectedly change it, whether that's from materially changing it, so preserving it, or using some other medium like alginate to copy it and make a mold of it, or whether that's arranging it or just exploring with it in a lot of different ways. So
that's cool. So I feel like there's an interesting thing that happens while you're doing these experimentations that's kind of a push and a pull between natural materials and sort of unnatural materials that you use to, for lack of a better word, process them. And kind of talk a little bit about where you go with that thinking when you're using something that's toxic to preserve a natural thing, and kind of where, what your thoughts are when you're doing that, kind of where that leads you in your explorations.
Yeah, I think that the tension that lives between something that's so natural and so ephemeral versus something that is so potentially toxic or strange is really interesting, because I think we're faced with those dualities every day, right? We have these things that we're drawn to but are not allowed to be touching, or we think are really beautiful and yet they are fading very quickly. So for me, a lot of those tensions are really interesting to press into, because they let me as a maker process through those experiences that I have as a human, and then also get to invite other people into that process as well.
That's actually really interesting, because I feel like that is a tension we're all experiencing sort of as a collective species right now. The beauty of this thing that we've shared together that is humanity, with the very toxic reality that we are currently a threat to each other, which is why, for instance, we're sharing this space only because we're able to stay masked. And, do you feel like your thinking around those types of relationships has evolved or changed after the pandemic?
I think that for me particularly, that has influenced the way that I'm working as a studio artist. Now, for me, that's looked like trying to deeper delight in really small, unexpected things like garden spaces. So the craft garden has been such an amazing opportunity to get to be outside and also to be caring well for the earth around me, and to get to know the landscape. Like, those are things that maybe before I didn't have time to press into because I was, inside or doing things with a community or in a crowd setting. And so it really became an opportunity, or it has become an opportunity, to get to actually take the time to stop and, crouch down and look at a bloom or look at a leaf in a way that I hadn't before. So, yes, paying attention to those strange, unexpected things in light of this change.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, we were really lucky that you were able to come back and spend some time with us, because, your trajectory was affected by the onset of things. And so I think in the way that you've experienced it, every artist, every person is having to make these adjustments. So it's really good to kind of consider how you can make the most of a bad situation and really draw creative inspiration from that moment. So I was going to ask next, your material explorations are, as we already discussed, really rich with a lot of sort of emotional tension and resonance. And I feel like there are some pieces that you really kind of deeply lean into these emotional states and these emotional landscapes. And one piece in particular is her suit, which I understand, you made with human hair. Thank you. So Abby's going to show this to us right now. So her suit, which actually we were fortunate enough to have on display in the hallway back when Abby was here with her first stint as a resident artist, but it's human hair and it's hand embroidered onto a pillowcase. And I mean, when I see it, it obviously to me brings to mind, Victorian mourning customs and, this jewelry and this fine, beautiful detail that you put into the act of commemorating something. And, on top of that, really, the pillowcase is this highly intimate object because in a lot of ways it kind of holds the essence of a person who sleeps on it for so many hours a day.
Right.
So do you want to, can you unpack a little bit about that for her suit with us and maybe in general how you're using material as a way to, explore these emotional landscapes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what draws me to materials is often something that's tied to memory. Like I think something that I'm really grateful for is that our memories are so material. Like you've tasted a piece of food before or smelled a certain smell or heard a piece of music or felt a texture that just dropped you right back in some memory that maybe you hadn't thought about for a long time or that, kind of makes your heart ache because you remember something that you had forgotten or someone who's no longer there. And so part of that feeling as a human is something that draws me to materials because when you do think about pillowcases, it is something that you yourself touch for 8 hours, a day.
You have healthy sleep habits.
Right. Yeah. So much of your life you're touching this material, and when someone leaves, you can smell them on it or you can see the landscapes left behind by them. And so that's something that's really tender, but also so much a part of many of our experiences. And so that as a material draws me to these other materials as well because those materials often hold memory. So much of the work is tied to this idea that I'm processing through my own grief or my own trauma or just trying to process through a conversation. And so those materials help me remember things. And so I think that memory drives me to be able to make these other things. And I think something that's really important too as an artist is to say to people who are approaching the art, like you're invited into this conversation. Like how has your experience of this material been? How does that change the way that you look at this piece? Because we're all so different, right? But in that difference, we share a common language. So,
yeah, I mean, honestly, I really feel struck seeing this piece again at this time because we had no idea what was coming when we first worked together on your hallway installation, and really seeing it has a completely different feeling to me and a meaning to me that was always there, but in the way that I think we as writ large kind of have divorced ourselves from those really painful realities and the painful act of remembering. We're really thrown into it right now. And it feels like we are connected to times that came before, like, in the early 20th century or back in the Victorian era, where we have to really think more clearly about what we are taking away from the people who may leave us and what we're going to remember them by. And so it's got a new sort of dimension of power to it that I think it always had, but maybe we are in a place where it seems more manifest to us. So it's a really beautiful piece.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
So I appreciate y'all bearing with us again. Please let us know as you're watching if there are any issues with the stream or if there are anything that you notice. We're troubleshooting stuff, so just feel free to let us know and give us feedback, but we really appreciate you bearing with us as we go forth on this first foray. So one of the things that's one of my favorite things about being the curatorial fellow here is that I get to spend a lot of time with y'all in your studio. And I think you particularly, every artist has a really great individual studio setup, but in your case, it really takes over the space. So one thing I really love to do is invite artists to do a little show and tell. And so Abby, will you do our inaugural studio sessions? Show and tell, and just tell us about something in your studio that's important to you or something you're working on or anything that inspires you.
Yeah, okay. So one thing that I would really like to talk about is all of the garden explorations that have been happening. I've found so much delight in going out to our craft garden and seeing something that I may have seen 100 times, but that lets me learn more about the landscape and the plants here, and just take those things and turn them into something totally different. So part of that has been exploring with banana plant, these beautiful red banana plant petals, and different strange things. I've been making jewelry out of different various pieces. So this is a bald cypress immature pine cone, which I've had a lot of fun exploring with. So it's interesting the different things that you sort of discover and fall in love with based on what you're finding, even if you're like, oh, this is such a strange material and unexpected delight.
This piece is really fun too, because if my mind isn't playing tricks on me, I can smell it even through my mouth.
You
It's
can.
got a very, very fragrant scent of pines, and it's a nice, like, transporting item. You wear it and you feel like you're somewhere else.
Right, and it would too leave a trail behind of the sap will leave a mark on your body. So even interesting how traces are left behind, and so that's something I'm very fascinated with right now. Like, what happens when the thing that you're wearing or the thing that's present demands to be remembered and doesn't leave you physically? And so I'm very interested in that right now. So still exploring with the cypress, bald cypress cones, but enjoying those. And I've also been making these are going to be kind of hard to see.
They look like little gumdrops.
Yeah, they
to
do.
me.
Or like snow caps or something. So here, would you like to hold some?
Sure, thank
So
you.
these
Whoa.
are actually molds of.
Don't know if you can get a closer look if it's going to be in focus, but let's just get all up in there, get good detail.
Yeah, so these are casts of the Black-Eyed Susan sinners.
Oh,
And
yeah, they are.
And so the closer you get to them, the more you recognize all of this detail that holds the seeds for the flower. And so it's really, really delightful and strange. And so I've been casting a lot of these, and I'm not entirely sure where they're going, what direction they'll take.
If I were a little bit younger, in my mouth.
Right, yeah.
If I were a child, they would be in my mouth.
They look like ice, like you kind of want to eat it.
Yeah.
Something sweet and simple. And so they catch the light really nicely, and even some of the casts have this, I don't know if you can see this, but some of them have little pieces of the center still stuck in the cast. And so we're experimenting with that. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
So really just delighting, trying to take the time to explore things that are unexpected and to see both sustainable ways of making and interesting experiments that allow me to make different installations and materials. So it's been really fun.
That's really exciting. I know that I don't know where we are on time, but I just really wanted to quickly just turn back around and talk a little bit about what you said about wearing things that leave a mark on you.
Yeah.
And that kind of leaves something with you. I know that you've been experimenting recently with pokeberries from our craft garden.
Yes.
And if you're interested in seeing some of those explorations, you can definitely check them out on Abby's Instagram at Abi Ogle.
Yep.
And I think we've got some stuff in the works, or we posted about it already on our website, so
Yeah, cool.
That'll be forthcoming. But can you talk a little bit about how that experimentation relates to that sense and kind of where you went with that?
Yeah, so first of all, you should know that pokeberries are toxic, so please do not eat ever or wear them unless you're
Abi Ogle and you're very careful with your research.
Yes, there's a lot of research that goes into these pieces. They're not actually just, I'm going to throw some berries around my neck, so please don't do that. They are a material that's really good for dyeing, so a lot of fiber dyeing happens with pokeberries. They're this beautiful dark purple berry, and they leave these lovely purple stains. And so one thing that I experimented with was I was really interested in how before the berries are burst at all, they're bead-like. And so to take that bead-like material and then wear it as if it were a strand of pearls, what happens when those pearls are destroyed as you wear them? But not only how are they destroyed, but how are they leaving these marks behind? So what happens when a material demands to be remembered or imposes itself on the body of the wearer? And I think so many things come to mind. I've been really interested art historically in all of the different visual references, like Artemisia Gentileschi's painting, where she's the beheading of
Judas slaying Holofernes.
Yes, exactly.
Love it.
So good. And so different things like that, but also what happens when the materials that we wear as humans are not sustainable and they're actually toxic to the environment. So what happens when something that you're wearing is toxic in a different form, or with these traces particularly, I'm interested in the fact that materials are constantly a part of our experience, and we are called to remember. So what happens whenever we're experiencing such great loss on such a great scale, and all of these people are gone? And how do we choose to remember? Is it a physical remembrance that we have? Is it something that you do every day that helps you move into a pattern of remembering? Is it something that they left an imprint on you for? So it's multi-layered, but it's really interesting to think about, especially with something that's so ephemeral too, right? Like, it's a mark that's very vivid and also toxic, but also is fading. Like, as soon as I was finished photographing those pieces, in like under 10 minutes, I stuck my head under the sink and was washing all of that off. So it was gone. I don't have any stains on my body. So it's interesting how those things feel so permanent or so vibrant or so important, and yet they fade.
Yeah. I really love that phrase, things that, materials that demand to be remembered. I really like that. I feel like it's very salient. So I guess, do you want to check in? How do you feel like we are on the wax? Do we need a little more time before it's ready to pull? Or
Wax might. I think we should give it like 1 more minute, but it's pretty ready to go.
Okay, well, while we give that a little more time, do we have any audience questions from the chat? Y'all are shy. Well, please feel free to sound off, even if it's not a question. If you want to say something or comment, please feel free. We'd love to hear from you guys. But I guess I have a few more questions. So one of them is that I learned recently that we have a common friend named Sarah Kress.
Oh, cool.
Who is a Houston-based poet, and I understand that y'all were at a residency in Vermont together some time ago.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She is. She's really great. But I actually was curious, if you wanted to speak to maybe the trajectory from that time, where your explorations were then, and kind of where you've developed them to this point, and sort of give us an idea of, where that arc is and how it goes when you're developing things from that long ago to now.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long now.
Yeah, I was there in February 2019. So being in Vermont, or part of my practice has been visiting different residencies and seeking out different artist communities in order to be in conversation with lots of different people and lots of different makers to see all of these different things. And I think it's really important to be in community and to ask questions. And so that has been such a great part of getting to do all of this. For the work that happened there, I actually was embroidering this piece while I was there and doing orange peel exploration. So the orange peels were actually the way I was keeping count of the days, because I was working such long hours there and just trying to work constantly on this. So every day I would eat an orange and I'd put it on the wall, and it would become this really beautiful flower, because as peels harden, they, become this really delightful, delicate, veined piece. And so I had, at the end I had, 28 orange peels that I pulled off the wall as an installation. But I was also working on this, and all of this has been, this embroidery is composed out of patterns from my surroundings and words that have been overheard. And so it's always been a sense of seeking to be a learner and to open up and listen and see the things around me, to be a careful observer. And so all of this was influenced in Vermont and has moved on to this too, that idea of like, oh, what patterns do you see that you delight in, that you want to see more of? And how do you create those patterns? Or how do you collect these words and generously share them? And so that's been an interesting way to see how I've moved through the year.
Yeah. Well, I hear we have maybe one question here, but before... Oh, thank y'all. Before we get to that, though, I really, really quickly wanted to touch on this, because there's a really interesting thing about this piece, which is that you've embroidered it on a material known as solvay, which is water-soluble. And I understand that you've had some encounters with water before, you've intentionally immersed it, but can you talk a little bit about that ephemerality? Because if you're able to see this, and one day you all will, but there are details on Abby's website as well, it's very dense, like hundreds and thousands of hours have clearly gone into this. So what does the solve choice, this solubility that's inherent to it, how does that come into how you're thinking about this piece as an ongoing project?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really drawn to ephemerality. I think, as we've talked about already, as humans, things don't last, even though we cling to them so hard.
Yeah.
And so with this piece, the ephemerality was really important to me because it has become this journalistic collection of my life over the last year that I've worked on it, year and a half. And so as something that I would like to continually grow, it becomes this book of memories, but they're all my memories. And so whenever someone else comes and looks at it, they bring their own understanding to the patterns or the words. They may have heard the phrases in a completely different context, and it might bring back a completely different understanding to them. And so it's something that I think is really lovely, but it's also ever-changing, even though its core is the same. And I also love the idea that something so solid and so well tangled together, like a web, is also something so easily destroyed. So it becomes this thing that it takes up so much space, it's so carefully reinforced, and yet water would just completely chemically change it. And when I installed it here this time, actually, my water bottle got caught in it, and I dissolved part of it. So that was an exciting thing. Wasn't quite prepared for that, but we salvaged most of it. So
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm glad that war wasn't lost until you're ready for whatever that is.
Who knows?
Well, I guess we're ready for some audience questions. Blaze, hit us.
Sure. So, question from Anna Wool. Are there any other plants in the garden you are looking forward to experimenting with?
So I'll just repeat the question. Are there any other plants in the garden you're looking forward to experimenting with?
Yes, there are some. We have roselle in the garden, which are these amazing, almost hibiscus-like flowers. And before they bloom, they're in this sort of bizarre alien-looking case that is just gorgeous. It has it's really beautiful red petals, and it kind of looks like something out of Stranger Things.
Oh yeah, it does. Oh, I never had that connection in my mind. That's good.
But I think it's so beautiful, and so I'm not sure what that will look like, but perhaps there's a crown or some kind of piece of jewelry in store for that, or maybe it will just be a collection. So I don't know. We'll see. Thank you for asking.
From María-Elisa Heg.
Hi, Mom.
Can we get some of those beautiful gummy clear black Susan seeds?
Oh, she wants them. Sure, I'll send some home with her.
That's very sweet.
I wish you could eat them. That'd be cool if they were gummy.
They really remind me of that, and I think it's funny that my mom commented on it because she actually would decorate a lot of our Christmas desserts and stuff with those very same size and sort of dimension of gummy candy.
I love that.
So on with the memory and
Yeah.
the feelings. It's very much happening in this moment.
That's amazing.
Thanks for that question, Mom.
Oh,
Who's next?
Delightful.
Sarah Crest says, thanks for the shout out.
You got it. You're awesome.
Another from Anna. Can you tell us more about how the Victorians used hair in their remembered loved ones?
Sure. So Victorian era jewelry was primarily made into jewelry, and so the idea was that even after someone was gone, you could still have them very close to you physically, which is something that is really beautiful and strange too, right? Hair is something that we identify one another by. It's something that's constantly leaving our body, and yet it doesn't hurt us. It's just this thing that we have continually with us. And so hair would be turned into bracelets or earrings, or put in lockets so that you could constantly have someone with you. But then also they were turned into hair wreaths. So you'd have these really ornate flowers that were created, and it would almost be a family tree because there would be multiple generations of people's hair.
Oh,
and so they would make this beautiful arrangement of flowers, which you can Google. They're very interesting. And so those would sort of take on a family portrait role as these really ephemeral objects. But hair lasts hundreds of years. I mean, it grows after we're dead. So it's a bizarre material.
Keeps on trucking.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Any other questions from the chat?
Oh, sorry.
All right. Well, I guess it's probably a good time to demold our
Woo,
wax.
woo. Yep. And
Woo!
here we go.
Oh my gosh, it's so weird.
I know, right?
Can we give the audience a little bit of a close up on that?
Yeah, there's taste buds and everything.
Woo!
I don't know.
Very visceral. So Abby's got a whole case full of them that she's working on in her studio, and I think like watching this process and seeing how many times you've done it is really something else.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So
Love it.
Very humorous.
Well, I don't know where we are in time. Stream mod, where are we at?
20 minutes.
Okay, cool. Well, I was going to also ask you if you wanted to talk a little bit about the work that you have coming up in residence.
Ooh, sure. Yeah, I'm very excited about those pieces. Okay, so we'll get both of them out. One of them is very delicate, so we're going to smooth that very slowly. You know.
You got this.
Oh, yeah.
This is how I will now learn how to carry that material myself whenever we install for in residence.
Yeah, well, you can always, if I don't know, you can always stick your hand inside the gravy boat and pick it up too. I don't know. Can you see that, Blaze?
We got it? Okay, cool.
Okay, so two pieces that I'm really honored to have in residence are this family heirloom gravy boat that is covered in dandelion seeds and this grapefruit skin tapestry, which some of you may have seen when you visited the HCCC back between September and February of last year. So, very excited about these pieces being a part of that ship. The grapefruit has been carefully eaten and the skin has been saved in order to make this bizarre tapestry that's very skin-like. But it's been preserved also in glycerin, so that replaces all of the water in the skin with glycerin so that it sort of plasticizes it, even though it's still biodegradable.
It's really crazy to see how much it's changed.
Yeah.
Even in the time since it was here last, the color of the skins as time goes on really changes into something really, this like ivory, sort of peachy, soft color. And I mean, ruby red grapefruits are known for their vivid color. And so seeing that change through time and chemical means is really fascinating. Do you think you could bring it a little closer so we let the kind folks on the stream take a good look at that texture?
Sure.
And maybe you could give it a rustle, see if they can hear any of that. So I remember when you were working on this and other grapefruit-related installations, that one of which was a part of the one that included wood oats in the hallway. You were constantly consuming ruby red grapefruits. Like, it was really amazing how much you were dedicated to that. Do you know off the top of your head how many you ate in total?
I was eating 4 a day for 2 or 3 or 4 months. So it was a lot of grapefruit. I don't know how many, but well over 100.
I believe that.
It was a lot. So I feel like there's maybe 8 petals, like butterfly shapes per grapefruit. So I don't know if it was hundreds because it was this piece and it was also the piece that was outside.
Yeah, and that
studio,
we actually were able to count, right? Because you had to drill individual holes for each wood oat that went into the wall. Was it like it was over 1,000?
Yeah, it was. I think it was roughly like 1,400. So that was just that piece, and this piece is exponentially more because they're all sutured together.
Right.
So.
I was going to ask how you actually got them all together. So
Yeah. So each one is very carefully sutured together to create a blanket, essentially. So think about quilting, and then think about if you were to take a grapefruit piece and bite into it and peel that skin back. So it's all of those pieces quilted together, essentially, but by hand with a very, very fine monofilament.
Oh, it's monofilament. Okay. Because I was going to say, I don't see any clear, obvious evidence of there being stitching or thread, which kind of gives it that other very strange quality of being skin, because it just looks like it's a complete thing, but then it has all these little different elements to it. So, do you want to talk to us a little bit about this beautiful gravy boat?
Sure. So, one thing that was really on my mind was this conversation of Southern misconception but also held in tension with so many wrongs that have been done in the South also. And so part of this piece was taking a family heirloom, because when you think about a family heirloom, they're these objects that you consider precious, and yet they're almost rendered useless, right? Because you wouldn't use a family heirloom unless someone was serving you, essentially, or you had a big dinner that you probably weren't eating. You weren't just making it and throwing it in a gravy boat, because that was like practical, right? And yet they're these precious objects that we keep around in cabinets and things. So they are such symbols of our of many people's experiences, or the family that's passed. And so I was interested in that as a memory, these things that we hold on to that belong to someone else. And yet I think when you cover them with a material like a dandelion seed, they become this completely useless, soft, delightful, strange thing. And when you think about dandelions, they're amazing. Not only are they weeds, they're persistent, right? They come up again and again, much to the chagrin of farmers and fathers with good yards everywhere. They refuse to be defeated, and yet they're so delightful. Anyone who has ever been outside with me knows that I can't resist picking dandelions and either just holding them and looking at them, or of course blowing them, making a wish. It's something that I deeply delight in. And so those things in tension become such an interesting conversation, because when something functional is rendered useless, but also given this halo, what happens to it? What happens when you take something that would only have been used in some sort of dynamic that was a racial hierarchy? What happens whenever that is rendered useless, and you say, like, no, this is not something to be glorified, even if it is an act of remembering. But then also, I think the South is a place that is incredibly rooted in memory, and I think Southerners have a really deep memory, and it's worth sharing. It's beautiful. It's a people who love their land and love their families, and they hold on to those histories. And so it's very much held in tension, I think, as all things are. But I'm interested in exploring that, and I think these pieces are delightful in all of their strange quality.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to sort of defang this very weighted symbol of class and sort of a caste inequality that kind of comes in America in a form that has a racial front. But I think as well, this sort of kind of dives into this question about, what do we do with the things that we inherited that we cannot accept, but we also cannot ignore?
Right.
And the act of confronting that, especially as a Southerner, especially as a white Southerner, I think you have a really heavy history to grapple with. And so finding ways to tie the beauty of the land, because I agree, I think this is a beautiful region. I think it's very much misunderstood, often willfully, I think, by people. But to take that, to apply it to this really sort of a toxic history without ignoring it, I think it's a really interesting thing to watch people do that in general, and to see the way that you've, inserted your spirit and your own, sense of, you prefer the hardy dandelion, which does not bow over to, the domination of land, to this vaunted history that you could celebrate, that a lot of people still do celebrate. And it's not to say you don't honor the family that you have and you love the place that you are at, but I think it's an interesting way to sort of playfully, but also I think seriously say, I acknowledge these things, and this is how I want to move forward. So is there anything that's sort of along those lines you feel like you've been exploring in other realms of your practice, or is this sort of your first sort of volley into that territory using these specific materials and objects from your history?
Yeah, I think for me it's all tied to this act of mourning. So grief and loss and mourning and being willing to listen. And so this process of placing dandelions on these heirlooms and being in this conversation is something that is very much tied to that act of mourning. So researching, learning, being aware, and saying, how do I change this? Whether it's in my own life, or whether it's inviting other people to say, hey, look, what happens whenever this is shifted, or changed or completely challenged. And so that's been a part of it. I have certainly been seeking to listen well and make things that invite that conversation, certainly. So this is the first time I've worked with heirlooms, but definitely having fun with that. But yeah, we'll see where it goes.
It's really interesting that you're, back in the studio here and specifically in this space, because one of the residents who will also be in residence, but who was here earlier in the year than you were, Masako Onodera, works a lot with family heirlooms, with silver platters lately, in particular for the work in residence. And I think, the idea that these objects hold more than a monetary value and that they have this heavy burden to carry the hopes and dreams of a family in the case of some of the objects she works with. And in your case, the history of a line. And I just think as an object, like something like this or like the silver platter that Masako uses, I would see in an antique shop. They're not really very...
Right.
They're not very in vogue right now. They're very chintzy. They can be a little cloying, but, they still hold these things. The object has a life outside of the place, the creator of it, right? And so I think it's a fascinating thing to see these particular kind of items really be drawn back into this artistic conversation. And I think it's fascinating that these two creative projects kind of converge in a weird way through time and space in this studio space, even though I know you did this piece in particular while you were staying at your family home, right? And is it Blountesville or Bluntsville? Bluntsville.
Mm-hmm.
And the dandelions were also picked on your family land, which is like very much like adding to that sort of connection.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about like heirlooms as maybe appealing, I know to you and to Masako, but do you think there's something maybe happening that might relate these feelings and these ideas back to these items that we're usually accustomed to forgetting?
Happening in my practice or in the world as a whole?
Either or. It's a pretty open-ended question, I have to admit.
Okay. Well, I think it's come back around to seeking to be someone who's noticing, right? Like, we are in a time when things are very different, and maybe we're working harder than we've ever worked before, but we're also in the same space a whole lot more, with the same people a whole lot more. And so what happens whenever you are surrounded by things that you've seen 100 times but never looked at? And so I think that for me is what's happening. Being willing to stop and actually engage with what's around you, engage with your surroundings, whether it is an heirloom or a person.
Yeah.
To say, this is worthwhile, it's worthwhile, and how do I engage with it now, and how should I be engaging with it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do we have any other audience questions from the chat? Silent in the chat. Well, I guess I have to address the blue elephant in the room. I think we can see that on screen. Can we see this? Can you tell us a little bit about this individual?
So this is a body cast of my entire body using silicone smooth-on, which is, it was quite an ordeal. If you ever want to cast a body, please let me know beforehand. I have some tips and tricks that can help you out. But so this is essentially, think of it as a wetsuit.
Oh my goodness. The way it moves.
No, it's so bizarre. So this is my entire body cast in silicone, and it's very heavy because it's your entire skin, right? So it's essentially an organ, which is very bizarre. And so the way that this works, though, is if you were to fill this with wax, or feel free to look into it. If you were to fill this with wax or with ice or water and then freeze it, what you would have is essentially a sculpture of, holding all the detail of the body, which is really beautiful. There's so many different parts of the, like, goosebumps and different, different imperfections in the skin that are caught really beautifully. And so this piece is something that I very much enjoyed experimenting with, and I've made a couple casts of it, but it's been super bizarre because it's not enforced, so if you were to make a cast with it, it wouldn't be beautifully sculptural and perfect. Instead, it's like this bizarre, flaccid experience. So I've been I've been really interested in working with it, and so full body casts are wild.
Yeah. And it looks like, is that cheesecloth?
Yes. So the cheesecloth is used when you after you have applied the smooth-on to the body, we put cheesecloth on it to avoid ripping the material.
Okay.
So the silicone by itself, because you have to, after it's on your body, you have to peel it off.
Right.
And so the cheesecloth helps to keep the material from just ripping.
Yeah. Okay. And so I assume you needed to get some assistance to get all the smooth on our plate, or did you do it all yourself?
No, yeah. Don't try to put smooth on by yourself. You will never, ever have one work well. Yeah, so I had two really amazing artists help me, KB Joseph and Megan Offarth, who are incredible artists and good friends. And so they helped me. So they applied all of the smooth on and then helped me pull it off of my body. So.
What did it feel like when they pulled it off? Was it very bizarre
It
or
was.
just kind of bizarre?
Yeah. No, it was very bizarre. Also because it's very hot.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
it's all rubber.
Yeah.
So you're just coated in rubber. And actually, whenever we first started, I had planted my feet and was posing. But when you stand up for that long, even if you're adjusting your weight, your blood pools, and so you start to pass out. So, knowing that I was going to pass out, I had to sit down, and part of the material ripped, and so we had to do damage control. And so what ended up happening is I laid on the ground, and they did, half of me, and then they rolled me over and did the other half. So, if you're doing smooth on, full body cast, maybe just lay on the ground, start out from there.
That's really funny.
It was bizarre.
Well, since we're continuing our mold and cast making conversation, I was wondering if you'd be interested in sharing some of these other wax mold forms that you've made.
Sure.
Before we kicked off, I was admiring this one of the sole of your foot, which is quite striking.
Sure.
Yeah, if you want to, and give the cats on the stream a little bit of a closer look, because it really captures so much of the detail of every wrinkle and bit of skin.
Yeah, so this is a soy wax cast of my foot. I was really interested in these different textures that were created from each wrinkle, and the silicone, as you see, really nicely captures that. So it's been really fun to experiment with this as a material, and there are these really delicate objects because the wax is strong, but it's not, it's not indestructible. And so it becomes this object, again with the ephemerality, that can just be melted in seconds. And so...
Abi Ogle foot candles coming soon?
Yeah, well, some of the tongues are candles.
Oh, really?
For tongues of flame.
I really love that. I love puns,
Yeah.
so this is very much my thing.
So I'm actually going to mount them on a candelabra, and it's going to be a tongue of flame,
Are you going to do a time lapse of them melting so all your tongues are going to be like,
yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love that.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. And a couple of those have already been made, and they burn pretty fast, but they're very funny. So
Yeah, that's so
I'm
cool.
interested. Yes, that's what all of these rows are. These are all candles, actually. But you can see the wicks.
Oh, sure. Gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know, right? So, funny tongues. Yeah.
I dig it.
It's been a lot of fun to play with. So.
Yeah, even watching you make the mold was pretty. It looked like it was fun. Like,
It
you
is
looked like you were
fun.
enjoying yourself. Like, and you do, love to lean into weirdness and weird experiences around material. So it was just, I really appreciated you giving us that moment to watch you in action. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad the glorious weirdness of tongue casting.
Yes.
I'm glad we could do that together.
Well, are there any last questions or comments from our kind audience this evening? All right, well, I think that we've covered a lot of ground this evening, and I really appreciate, again, you being available and open to sharing your influences and your processes with us. It's been such a pleasure, and it's been so nice to have you back with us in this bizarre time, but it's just been great, and I really appreciate you sharing so much with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be a part of the Craft Center, so I appreciate you, María-Elisa. You're amazing.
Thank you. Right back at you. Well, that does it for our first ever studio session. Thank you everybody who joined us this evening. Please tune in, check our Facebook, our social media outlets, our website to find out the date of the next August studio sessions, which will be with ceramist Brian Vu, who is currently in residence here as well. And the next one will be in September with ceramist Nicole Lemire, who is also here in the building as a resident. And we really look forward to you joining us again for a great conversation, more demos, show and tell, jokes, and all the good stuff. We really miss you all so much, but we hope that you felt like you got a chance to be in the building for a little while today. And feel free to give us feedback on our page, on our email. We just really appreciate all your support and your presence. So thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Bye!